Thank you, Roger. I would prefer to serve everybody their favorite beverage as we get late in the afternoon, but I was reminded when I sat down that I can't dream this big. When I was an aspiring veterinarian, I would have never guessed I would be sitting between the CDC and the FDA and acting important. Pretty sure my kids wouldn't understand it either. What we're going to try and do today is we're going to try and spend about 15 minutes and about 15 slides, and we're going to try and give you a perspective of data and how the food systems understand, use, and I'm going to ask a question and perhaps try and answer it later. Data in the context of AMR is for the greater good, or should be. But data in the context of animal agriculture is an asset that may be bartered. And I'll try and talk about that in a minute. But first, I was always taught in presentations that you're supposed to leave the audience that's usually varied in their sort of background and their bias with some sort of remnant that they can forever remember. Now, I'm not that good a speaker, so this is kind of a long shot, but I was blessed with a son that has done quite well. He's a genetic epidemiologist. He works for DaVita, runs an outcomes research group, and he and I spar greatly in the philosophy of science. So we've heard about One Health, and we've heard about the demise of science in this sort of, or the respect for science. So he sent me, timely signal, he sent me this quote. To reject the advice of experts is to assert autonomy, a way for Americans to demonstrate their independence from nefarious experts. Now, for those of you that love reading opinion editors that absolutely capture the issue of why the sort of undereducated, if that's the right term, it sounds derogatory, shouldn't be, why they don't want to listen to the scientists, I think at the bottom of the screen, I think we lost it, but there is a fantastic, I mean, as good as I've ever seen written editorial in this capacity. It says essentially, and I'm going to capture the moment, people want to be in control, and society has got so sophisticated that they need experts to survive, and they absolutely despise it. And so therefore, every time they get a chance, they want to assert autonomy. And it's really, really easy to assert autonomy with social media as your resource. Interesting. I think it's in the bottom. You can't see it here, but I can see it here. So for those of you... It's up? Okay, perfect. So it's foreignaffairs.com. If you like reading, and it's great debate material, there are amazing nuggets in this editorial. It's really, really interesting. Pretty good for a Nebraska boy that used to preg check cattle until he had shoulder surgery. Okay. What about animal health? What about the diversity in animal health? It's complicated. I think we heard from a lady that grew up in New Mexico and has as a stock tank her swimming pool. Well, there's cows out there. And there's lots of places in this country that share, elk and cattle share the same pastures. How do you get data from them? So within diversity, or within species, there's major geographic diversity, especially in the cattle industry. I love the age diversity between species. What did we hear from the Pilgrims lady? How many days does it take for the youngest chicken to go to market? 32 days. Well, you know, if you're doing hygiene and keeping buildings clean, it's easier to keep that building clean for 32 days as compared to cattle, which is what? Yeah, that's about 18 months plus or minus 4. Takes a long time. So how do you keep that sort of clean enough so that the bugs don't sort of take over? And then we got the production size diversity. How many of you have heard of factory farms? You're lying if you don't raise your hand. Because the world loves to paint us in the corner of putting too many animals in too little a space, and therefore we're the breeding grounds of big bad bacteria. But in fact, I love what you said from Pipestone. They're producing the healthiest pigs they've produced since you started in veterinary practice, and that's more than 20 years ago, right?
That's right.
Folks, we've come a heck of a long way. And finally, the VFD taught us that veterinary influence diversity, that's my vernacular for, can I make a living in Wyoming as a veterinarian? Because if I can't, I'm going to have to relocate to where the people are. The problem is, sometimes where the people are is not where the animals are, if you're in food animal. How do I make a living? And if I can't make a living, how do I give advice? Data use and data access. Human health, as you've heard already from Don, that's a federal mandate. Had to record. And that record was before they said connect, right? We have a bigger problem. I'm pretty sure Pipestone has a data system that they really don't want to link with Carter. Right, Carter? Veterinarian for cattle group, Cactus. And yet, the expectation is we want to connect together. No, we don't. Protein is competitive. It's been competitive for a long time. The cows guys want to sell more beef. The pork guys want to sell more pork. Chicken guys want to own the world. Right, Hector? Okay. And all of a sudden we got the fish people that remind us that they have the best feed conversion of all the protein species. Okay. Data capture processes are very, very, very different. I can take you to many operations that still use the big chief tablet for data collection. Why? Because fiber optics has not reached Mobridge, South Dakota yet. And if you're going to do data, you've got to have high-speed transmission in order to have speed of commerce sort of keep active. Can't happen any other way. And finally, the incentives are quite different. Now, talk about that in a little bit. But Medicare and Medicaid likes to pay if you play by their rules. And if you don't pay by their rules, what happens? They don't pay. Agriculture plays by the rules of, can I stay in business next year? It's very different. Okay. I can't do what I do unless I have this vast network. Here's one of my guys. He's on the pack car. Life is small. It's interesting. Randy taught my son in Minnesota. So Randy and I have been friends for a while. I got a great story about One Health where Randy and I took 2 MDs from Merck Human Health out to a poultry farm about 1.5 years ago. It was one of the best days of my life. Because 2 MDs that didn't understand agriculture got to stand in a poultry barn, and at the end, the one MD, she was a very bright lady, and she was not a hugger, which is a fine way of saying she really stood off and tried to figure this out. We got done that day, she hugged me and she said, I know more about my food supply today than I have in my 35 years as an MD. That's a big moment. It's a good moment. Randy's helped me with this presentation. Randy's doing something that Mike and his team is doing on the cattle side. Randy's doing on the poultry side. He says some things that are important. We need to accurately characterize how we use antibiotics and responsible. The poultry industry has responded in a very big way. Very, very, very big way. Another story. I got invited to hang out with an advisory committee to the UN in the UK. And if you know anything about what's going on in human medicine, Dame Sally Davies was the sort of lead. I got to sort of hang out with some really big thinkers. At the end, I said to the chair, she said, "What'd you learn here?" And I said, "Well, what I learned was poultry in the U.S. has done a masterful job of using less antibiotics. So much so that today, 9 billion broilers, right, Hector? 45% are raised without antibiotics." Chairman Davies, how many hospitals have reduced antibiotics by that much? Made her angry. But my point was made. Okay? As we think about farm collection, we have to think about some competing science that we got to deal with. We can figure out a lot of stuff with genomic transmission, genomic assessment. We can figure out whether or not the gene that ended up in the hospital actually could have came from the farm. But as my son reminds me, most people in the hospital have immune-compromised conditions. And if they weren't immune-compromised, would the bug have as much impact? Rather interesting philosophical question. So just because it's sourced from the farm doesn't matter. The causal impact needs to be assessed. The poultry industry, just like all the other industries, have some issues, some concerns, some questions. How will the livestock and poultry producers be protected given NARMs and a non-regulatory pathway? Will producer information be blinded? Could the isolates from the cecum be used in investigations and subject to regulatory consequences? And would the producer be liable? Because in commerce, there's an interesting situation. When I sell my fat cow, steer, heifer, to the owner that goes to the packing plant, I relinquish my ownership. So, do I relinquish my ownership of the bugs that go with that animal? Legal hasn't figured this one out yet. Okay? Larry Granger, another one of my networks. Thank you, Larry. Larry's helped me. We spent some time together in Morocco last week. I'll leave that there. Long story, we don't have time. You've seen this poster already once. The reason that I bring it up is I want you to look at the two bars in the middle, because my presentation is centered around those two bars. Voluntary and privacy. We heard, and we'll hear again, human medicine is not very voluntary. Data is pretty much mandatory through some systems, either federal or state. It's not true in animal agriculture. It still has to be voluntary. So Dr. Apley and his crew and everybody that's going out there trying to do NOMs, they got to get voluntary permission from the producer. It's the way it should be. But it really changes the way data is accessible. And we've heard of SIPSA, and you've seen this one before. This one's really important, because in agriculture we have to be protected. I don't know how to say it any other way. There are people that earn a living raising money, doing things that are not friendly to us. Very unfriendly to us. I could be more graphic, I'm not going to be. At the end of the day, we still have to feed a lot of people. And we're going to have to feed a lot of people going forward. And if we're going to continue to do things, and we're going to continue to create data sets, and there's lots and lots of data sets out there, we have to recognize that. Okay. Take-home messages down to the last 2 or 3 slides. Every system of food production in any Western country of the world, and the U.S. certainly is one of those leaders, has massive amounts of data collection that they can access. Now, is it always linked to use of antibiotics? Some, like Pipestone, absolutely doing that. Pilgrims, absolutely doing that. Mary Betrell's probably not here. Smithfield's, absolutely doing that. So there are massive systems that have massive amounts of data. And we can figure out how to get access to that if we got the other pieces of the puzzle put in place. Now, it gets really, really dicey when you look at the direct link from production to the hospital and you try to say that bug passed through all these checks and balances, including cooking or freezing or refrigeration, to that patient. If you believe in the precautionary principle, it's easy to say it's a risk. No argument. If you believe in risk management, now you got a different question. Randy made it very clear, the biomass denominator, while it's useful as a metric, be careful, because what is the goal of collecting data in agriculture really? What is our goal on antibiotic stewardship? It's not a complicated goal. What is the goal? The goal is to reduce human AMR. That's what this conference is about. If you're going to reduce, and I have to tell you a story in that capacity, but I'm sure I'll run out of time, so I better wait. We have to remain on the idea that what we do in this space is public health, is public health, is public health. It's not about reducing antibiotics. It's about figuring out how we do the best job possible to share the responsibility with our human colleagues to do the very best job we can to improve public health and not add to the challenge of AMR. Last slide. Collecting antibiotic use data in animal health involves multiple species with different routes of sales and distribution pathways. Remember, antibiotics do not go through Walgreens and CVS in veterinary medicine. For those of you that are paying attention, pharmacies are a really interesting spot to gain sales information. And they have individual data on clients. We don't have that. And it's not unusual in veterinary distribution of drugs in North America for drugs to be shipped from the manufacturer to a distribution, and before it's in an animal, it goes through 4 more distribution systems. And each time the drug is sold, it becomes the ownership of the new owner, and the old owner has no more responsibility. That's the way the system works. Many antibiotics used in animal health are antibiotics of lesser importance. For those of you that have been paying attention, when they talk about all the antibiotics we use in animal health, they kept talking about 70-80% of the total volume. One drug made up 40% of that. Which one was it? Tetracycline. It's not a very big drug in human health. Think about that. Some antibiotics used in animal health currently have minimal record-keeping pathways. Now, we heard from Bill Flynn. The 5-year plan is pulling those long-term antibiotics off the OTC shelf sometime in the next 3 or 4 years. And they're going under script. Veterinary oversight. Very much needed. Probably, I'm completely for it. But currently, we have no way of knowing. Because they've been that way for how long? Longer than I've been a veterinarian, and that's approaching 40 years. Decisions and resources in animal health for optimized antibiotic stewardship needs to focus on best justified decisions for the use of antibiotics. I loved whoever said it. I do not believe in reduction as a goal. What I believe in is using enough antibiotics so that the animals are cared for well. So my veterinary oath says. Lastly, antibiotic stewardship decisions should be science-based and focused on improving AMR issues in human health. If you can't remember what this conference is about, it is about veterinarians, animal agriculture, being a colleague with human medicine, and helping reduce AMR in humans. Thank you.